What are memories? Why do some things, even the smallest and most insignificant ones, like the pattern of the carpet at your grandmother's house, the smell of your favorite room, or the sounds of a familiar street, stay with us, while other, seemingly important things, such as our grades at school or people's birthdays, disappear without a trace? Only Yesterday is one of the early films produced by the legendary Studio Ghibli. It was a commercial success in Japan, and many of its directorial and storytelling techniques were groundbreaking for their time. What is more, the production of Only Yesterday helped shape Studio Ghibli into the studio we know today. And yet, the film is rarely remembered. It seldom appears on lists of Ghibli's greatest works. There are hardly any YouTube videos about it, and I am sure many of you have never even heard of it. Why has it been forgotten? Is Only Yesterday still worth watching today? And what can the film teach us about the way our memories work? In 1987, Hayao Miyazaki came across a new shoujo manga written by Hotaru Okamoto and illustrated by Yuko Tone. He was struck by the vividness and sincerity with which it portrayed the protagonist's childhood, her life in Tokyo, her difficulties with her parents, and her gradual coming of age. At the time, however, the legendary director was already working on another film about childhood, My Neighbor, Totoro. And as Miyazaki later admitted, although the manga had made a powerful impression on him, he had no idea how to turn it into a film. So Miyazaki introduced the story to his mentor, friend, colleague, and eternal rival, Isao Takahata. Takahata had only just released the hugely successful Grave of the Fireflies and was preparing to take on a new project. Miyazaki was willing to produce the film if Takahata agreed to adapt the manga. Fortunately, Takahata was taken with the story as well. And so, the work began. Except it soon became clear that things would not be quite so simple. The problem was that Okamoto and Tone's original manga is a collection of loosely connected sketches about the childhood of its heroine, Taiko, rather than a single continuous story. There is no real beginning, and by the time work on the film started, the ending had not even been written yet. This kind of format works perfectly well for a weekly manga or a television series, but a film built this way would simply fall apart into a sequence of disconnected scenes and become completely unengaging. To solve this problem, Takahata had to create a framing story centered on Taiko as an adult, looking back on her younger self. Through these memories, she tries to understand who she is, who she became as she grew up, and who she has yet to become. But this purely narrative decision set off a whole chain of changes. It required not only new directorial techniques, but also a radical reconsideration of the way Studio Ghibli itself was organized. Only Yesterday was just Studio Ghibli's sixth film. In its early years, the studio released at least one, and sometimes several, films annually, so this was still the very beginning of its history. Miyazaki directed 4 of those first 6 films, while Takahata directed only 2. The reason was simple. Isao Takahata was an extremely slow and meticulous filmmaker. He wanted everything to feel as authentic as possible, from the way the characters spoke to the way they cut fruit. There is a revealing story from the production of Grave of the Fireflies. Takahata was deeply dissatisfied with the way a watermelon was sliced in one scene because he felt the process had been depicted inaccurately. From then on, he made the animators carefully study the proper ways of cutting different kinds of fruit. This attention to detail contributed to one of the most memorable scenes in Only Yesterday, in which Taiko's family prepares to try a pineapple for the first time. The film shows the entire process of cutting it in meticulous detail, which only makes the character's visible but restrained disappointment after tasting the unripe fruit twice as ironic.
大したもんじゃないな。
あんまり甘くないのね。缶詰と全然味が違うよ。
長生きするといろんな経験するよ。
Fruit was far from the only thing Takahata made his animators study. He had them research the everyday lives of farmers, and even took the entire studio on a trip to the countryside. One background artist was made to spend almost an entire year drawing nothing but flowers. The sheer scale of the production, the countless revisions unavoidable when working with perfectionists like Miyazaki and Takahata, the absurd number of drawings required, and the fact that Ghibli's projects at the time relied largely on freelancers hired for individual films, as is still common across the anime industry, made working on a Ghibli production far less appealing than it might seem. It is hard to believe today, but animators actually turned down jobs at Studio Ghibli. And this was a serious problem for Miyazaki and Takahata, who had founded Ghibli with a clear belief that animators should be paid well and should not have to worry about their future. The founders had only two options: shut the studio down, or radically overhaul the way it operated. As you can probably guess, they chose the latter. From that point on, the studio began offering permanent staff positions, relying not on freelancers, but on its own full-time employees. Ghibli also established an in-house training program for new animators. This allowed the studio to develop its own animation culture and greatly reduce its dependence on outside talent. It was during the production of Only Yesterday that Ghibli moved into its office in Kogane, just outside Tokyo, the very building we constantly see in documentaries about the studio. The studio now had to establish a continuous production cycle. After all, it needed money to support a permanent staff. And so, even before Only Yesterday was released, work had already begun on Miyazaki's next film, Porco Rosso. Today, it is difficult to imagine just how risky that decision was. A single failure could affect more than the box office results of one particular film. It could cause the young studio to collapse like a house of cards. But Takahata and Miyazaki are considered geniuses for a reason. Only Yesterday earned more than 4 billion yen at the Japanese box office, becoming an unexpected hit and helping the studio find its footing. So without Takahata's exacting standards, and without this film, Studio Ghibli might never have become the studio we know today. But what exactly drew audiences to the cinema? The answer is that the film was revolutionary not only for Studio Ghibli itself. It also showed that anime films could look and feel completely different from anything that had come before. Takahata's central idea was to create the strongest possible contrast between Taiko's past, which was based on the manga, and her present, which he had written himself. To achieve this, he used 3 different techniques. First, color palette. Takahata envisioned the childhood memories in a pale color palette, with the edges of the frame fading away and the backgrounds kept deliberately minimal. This allowed the film to emphasize only the details that had left a lasting impression on Taiko, while also capturing the feeling of memory itself and paying tribute to the visual style of the original manga. The present-day scenes, by contrast, were meant to have detailed and realistic backgrounds. Almost hyper-realistic, in fact. The train sequence, for example, could easily impress even Makoto Shinkai. This contrast, used in both interiors and outdoor scenes, made each time period instantly recognizable. It gave Takahata far greater freedom and allowed him to approach the storytelling in a much more playful way. No extra explanations or clarifications were needed for the audience to understand when a scene was taking place. Backgrounds were usually treated as a secondary element in anime, but Takahata turned them into one of the film's central techniques. Second, facial animation. Another of Takahata's revolutionary decisions concerned the order in which the dialogue was recorded. In the anime industry, voices are still usually recorded only after the animation has been completed, at least in rough form. For Only Yesterday, however, Takahata insisted that every scene set in Taiko's present be recorded in advance. He even invited some of the actors to perform together in the same room and had their sessions filmed. Assistant director Norihiko Sudo used an 8mm camera and an audio recorder to capture their natural movements. Stills from this footage were then printed out and used by the artists and animators as reference material, both for the character designs and for the animation itself. Even in the clips shown throughout this essay, you can probably notice how unusual the character's facial animation looks. But that was precisely what made Takahata's realistic approach so groundbreaking. It brought animation closer to live-action cinema made for adult audiences. The voices for all the scenes from Taiko's childhood, meanwhile, were recorded in the traditional way, after the animation had already been produced. As a result, the characters look noticeably different in the past and the present, almost as though Only Yesterday were 2 separate films. Or, more accurately, a film within a film. Memories, contained within reality. Finally, the third element was the use of music. Takahata worked extensively with soundtracks in anime, even though he did not compose the music himself. For example, he directed Gauche the Cellist, in which anthropomorphic animals help a young musician master his craft. Throughout the film, sound and action are woven together with remarkable skill. Later, at Studio Ghibli, Takahata served as the music director on Kiki's delivery service, helping to shape its enchanting European-inspired sound. It is not surprising, then, that Takahata took an equally original approach to the music in his own film. He invited Katsuhoshi to compose the score, but just like the animation, the music is clearly divided into two distinct parts. During Taiko's childhood memories, we hear original pieces written specifically for the film. In the present-day scenes, however, the soundtrack draws on a wide range of other music. European classical works by Schubert, Japanese pop that was popular around the time of the film's release, including songs by the Wild Ones, and, most importantly, Eastern European folk music. The film features a Bulgarian women's choir, Romanian folk songs, and music by Brahms. What is more, all of these pieces are woven directly into the film's world, since they are played in the car by one of the characters, Toshio. He says that the music reminds him of life in the countryside, of farmers, and of working in the fields. And this connects directly to the film's central theme. Ultimately, Takahata brilliantly divides the film into two parts, the present and the past. He separates them through the visual style, the animation, and even the music, while employing groundbreaking directorial techniques that no one in the industry had used before. But the most remarkable thing is that the film still feels completely cohesive. These two parts work in tandem, telling a single story, despite, and, in some ways, precisely because of, their outward differences. One of my favorite feelings is traveling by train or car in the evening, knowing there is still some way to go. Half an hour, maybe the whole night. You look out of the window and watch oncoming cars, blurred houses and trees, and distant lights rushing past. At that moment, you have absolutely nothing to do. And at the same time, there is nothing you need to do. You are simply moving forward. And that is when memories begin to surface. Fragments from childhood, words someone said a long time ago, vague images that seem to have no significance in your life anymore, yet still feel comforting to remember. Only Yesterday is a film about that exact feeling. While the original manga was a story about childhood and growing up, Takahata's reworking transformed it into a story about the countless memories that live within each of us, and how they can come alive again if we allow them to. At 27, Taiko appears to be doing well. She lives in Tokyo, has a prestigious job, and regularly spends time with the people close to her. The only thing missing, perhaps, is a boyfriend. And yet, something vague continues to trouble her. She cannot shake the feeling that she is not quite where she belongs. In the countryside, however, she feels completely at home. This is already her second time spending her vacation there. As a child, her friends would go away to visit their grandparents, while Taiko had to stay in the city for the summer, and she envied them. That memory of a childhood injustice suddenly begins to pull other memories along with it. And as Taiko herself says in the film, she ends up accidentally bringing her childhood self to the countryside with her. That memory of a childhood injustice suddenly begins to pull other memories along with it. At first, she sees it as nothing more than sweet, amusing nostalgia. She remembers arguing with her sisters, the first time someone confessed his feelings for her, which still makes her smile. And the day her family tried that pineapple for the first time. But as she settles into the quiet rhythm of life in the countryside, Taiko begins to notice more and more parallels between her present and her childhood. More than that, she realizes that her childhood, long thought forgotten, is still shaping who she is. Even her desire to spend her vacation in the countryside comes directly from those childhood memories. The fact that she has no boyfriend is also rooted in childhood. She remembers a scruffy boy from a poor family who sat next to her at school and once refused to shake her hand. Taiko believed he had done it because he had seen through her hypocrisy, that she did not truly want to be friends with him, and was only pretending to be polite. Without fully realizing it, young Taiko took the rejection personally. She came to believe that she was unworthy of love because she was a bad person. But years later, when she tells the story to her new friend Toshio, she suddenly realizes that the boy had not acted that way because he sensed her insincerity. He had acted that way because he was in love with her. Refusing her hand was his attempt to hide his embarrassment, to make himself look cool. Throughout the film, Taiko worries that she is being insincere toward the people in the countryside, that she is just a fashionable city woman who has come to try living close to nature for a week, as though the village were some kind of zoo filled with farmers. But when Taiko remembers the boy from her childhood and, for the first time in her life, sees that story differently, it completely changes the way she sees herself. She comes to the countryside because she genuinely loves this way of life. She works hard, sincerely helps the local people, and values both their culture and their company. There is not a trace of hypocrisy in any of it. She was the only one who saw something wrong. By changing one small detail in the way she understood her past, Taiko suddenly begins to see herself and her future in an entirely new light. In this sense, it is telling that the film ends with adult Taiko choosing not to forget her childhood self, not to take her back to the city and lock her away in a closet. Instead, she decides to listen to her memories. She allows her 5th grade self to show her the way forward toward a new and unfamiliar future. You can never truly escape your past. It will always find its way back to you. Wherever you go, the 10-year-old version of yourself will always be following close behind. More than that, this child is still a part of who you are. Your memories, however vague they may seem, are what make you the person you have become. That is why the only way to move forward is not to fight your memories or try to bury them. It is to look at the past with fresh eyes, accept it, reflect on it, and find within it the motivation to keep going. The past and the present do not really exist separately. They exist at the same time. And only yesterday is the perfect illustration of that. Both Hayao Miyazaki and Isao Takahata drew inspiration from their surroundings, from everyday life, and from the ordinary world. But from there, they moved in completely different directions. Miyazaki sought to awaken people's imaginations by showing them something they had never seen before. Takahata, meanwhile, aimed to reveal ordinary everyday events in a new light. That is why Only Yesterday stands out so sharply among Studio Ghibli's films. In its distinctly adult perspective, the complexity of its ideas, its realism, and its unique directorial techniques. And that is the main reason the film is so often forgotten. It is simply difficult to associate it with everything we know and remember about Studio Ghibli. And yet, however deeply it may hide from view in the hazy fog of memory, its existence continues to shape the studio to this day. It continues to remind us of the life, career, and work of one of anime's most important directors, Isao Takahata, who passed away in 2018. And it continues to affect those who have seen the film and taken it to heart. People like me, and I hope some of you as well. Because it is difficult to find a more vivid and moving reminder of how important it is, at least once in a while, to remember your childhood, and to bring along on your journey the 10-year-old version of yourself who will always live somewhere inside you. Thank you for watching this essay. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos. And a huge thank you to everyone who supports the channel financially. It is thanks to you that I am able to make video essays like this one. You can follow the link in the description to join my Patreon and get access to additional materials. See you next time.